All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our August webinar, which is our first monthly webinar in our series on college applications. This morning, our webinar is Kickstarting College Applications, 2021 Common Application and ApplyTexas Updates. We are now housed at the coordinating board, so we have some great information on ApplyTexas, and we have an expert speaker that's joining us on the Common Application and important updates as you all work with your seniors and the class of 2021. We have several hundred folks registered this morning, so we will always follow up with the email recording and send it to everyone if you have colleagues that were not able to join live. So with Texas OnCourse, all Texas students, no matter where they come from or where they're headed, have a plan for success after high school. That's our mission. We're a state-funded initiative. We were formerly out of the University of Texas at Austin, and in 2021, we have become a part of the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, and we're in Austin, Texas. So one of the things we do with our webinar, if you have not subscribed to our YouTube channel, please go ahead and do so. You can search our content. We have information there in our is involved. We pull from our academy and we put our webinars on YouTube as well. So when you get this recording, that will take you to our YouTube channel and you can go ahead and subscribe. So this is our agenda for this morning. As I mentioned, we have a lot of information that we want to cover in an hour. We have Samantha Gonzalez from our content and resources team at Texas OnCourse, who's going to spotlight some really fantastic resources that will help you in your college applications work with students this year. Samantha will kick it off, and then Jaslyn Green from Texas OnCourse is going to cover all of the changes and updates to the ApplyTexas application and cover what's new in the counselor suite, which will help your work with students this year. And then we have Yvette Becker, who's the manager at the Common app. She is joining us as our guest speaker this morning, and she's got some really fantastic information on the Common app, things that have changed and how that can impact your work with students this year and in the future. And then we have saved some time for question and discussion toward the end. My name's Laura Guggen. We are in a couple of years into our monthly webinar series now. I'm Director of Program Implementation, so my team works directly with the school districts in Texas on programs and pilots that we have across the state. Samantha?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Samantha Gonzalez, the Assistant Director of Content and Resources on the Content and Resources team here at Texas OnCourse, and I have a background in college access and success advising.
Morning, everyone. I'm Jaslyn Green, Director of Content and Resources on the Texas OnCourse team. I'm definitely excited to be here and share some updates around the ApplyTexas. I support our subject matter experts, instructional designers, and also editors on the Texas OnCourse initiative.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Yvette Becker. I am a manager of the member relations team at Common App. So we are the team that works with all the colleges that your students are applying to via the Common App. So we support almost 1,000 institutions at this point in time. In my background, I do have a master's in higher education, and I used to work in college admissions.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. Before we dive into some of our updates, we would certainly like to open it up to everyone that's joining us this morning, just because, you know, it's been quite a year. We've had a pandemic. We had a very unusual year in terms of instruction and college applications this last year and back to 2020. So if you just want to take a minute and let us know if you have questions that you have about the college applications that we're talking about in this webinar, chances are we're probably going to cover them because we have a lot of great information. But if there's anything specific you're dying to know as you join this webinar this morning, we can see if we can cover it. And just take a minute and put that in the chat. Great. I see some already. Ivy League college applications on the Common App or ApplyTexas. I'm just going to go ahead and answer that. So ApplyTexas is the Texas application used in states for public institutions. So if you're looking at Ivy League colleges, many of those will be on the Common App, and we'll let Yvette talk more about that. We are going to talk a little bit about FAFSA tracking in the counselor suite. We'll see about covering junior colleges. We've had some questions about delays. And changes to ApplyTexas since it has a new site. Great. Yeah, Jaslyn has some really great slides about what those updates look like in the counselor portal. So y'all feel free to continue to add those questions. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Samantha so she can talk about some resources and we can get into all the updates you all are looking for.
Good morning again. I'm going to go ahead and cover just a new resource that Texas OnCourse has launched this previous spring that we're pretty excited about. So Laura, if you can go to the next slide. Yes, so one of our new resources in partnership with College Forward and TEA is the College and Career Support from Texas College Bridge. So on College Forward's website, they actually have student content where it helps it walks through students through career exploration, college choice, and applying to college and understanding financial aid and college costs. With on Texas OnCourse, we actually took that content and put it into student facing modules where you can download these
Samantha, we lost your audio. If you are able to go back and repeat what you just mentioned.
Students to walk through. Can you guys hear me? My internet's getting a little unstable.
Sorry, Samantha, can you go back a little bit? I just mentioned that we missed part of that.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So Texas OnCourse partnered with College Forward and TEA to turn College Forward's student-facing content on their website that helps students walk through college applications, career exploration, as well as understanding financial aid, many college and career readiness topics. So we took that content and put it into student-facing modules where you can download and access these student-facing modules from our website. On our website, you can actually find instructions on how to download. You can go to the next slide. So we do provide instructions for how to download these modules. We did make these modules interactive, more engaging. It does help walk the student step by step through college exploration, career exploration, financial aid. And it's a simple download and a simple upload into your platforms that you are using. It should be compatible with the platform that you're using in your classrooms. And if you do need more support on understanding how to upload it into your platform, on the next slide, we do provide another link for how to upload this common cartridge into your platforms. So on the College Forward's website, they do have quizzes and worksheets and conversation starters and guided activities. Next slide. And like I mentioned, we went ahead and took all of those resources and interactive activities and made them just a little bit more engaging. So one type of resource that we made more engaging are these conversation starters that you see here on the screen. These provide opportunities to students to take what they've learned outside of the modules and continue these conversations with their counselors, their advisors, teachers, parents, or guardians, and others. For example, the Understanding Financial Aid and College Cost Conversation Starter provides questions they should ask the college admissions office or the financial aid office, and they do have room to take notes here on these sheets as well. Next page. So students in these modules, students will also have a place to keep their research in one place and organized with the college matrix and the career matrix. The college matrix allows students to build a college list that includes foundation schools, target schools, and reach schools. The career matrix allows students to compare different careers and is able to see that on the career matrix. So we do also provide checklists throughout the modules, which allows students to stay organized and aware of items they need to complete as they prepare for college, transition to college, and enroll into their college courses. And I'll hand it over to Jaslyn for ApplyTexas Updates.
Thanks, Samantha. We'll make sure to share out the direct links as well. I realize the tiny URLs didn't hyperlink in the chat, so we'll make sure we get those out to everyone when we send out the webinar recording. So as you all know, ApplyTexas has a new look and feel this year, so we really wanted to share a few updates to just ensure that you have the information that you need as you are gearing up for application season and working with students and families. So the new URL, this is the new URL. We'll make sure to also share that information to go and access the site. And one of the big things about it is the site is now mobile friendly. I know that's something that folks have asked for in the past. And so it's finally here. You can actually access it. Students have the ability to access it from their phone. So it's more just user friendly, especially during these times during the pandemic. Also, the account setup has been completely simplified. Students now, when they go to set up an account, they would enter a username, an email, and then a password. For the old site, it actually required students to complete an entire profile. And sometimes students got tripled over some of the questions. And so they didn't get a chance to actually set up their account. So that process has been streamlined. Students will actually create their account really with those 3 steps, just username, email, and password. And the nice thing about it is the username is also self-selected this time. Before, the system would generate the username and then students wouldn't remember what that information is. And so that's changed. And then the other change we'd like to highlight is about the password requirements. Recognize a lot of times students get tripped up over passwords. And so the old site, students had to, the password was like 8 to 12 characters long. It had to contain at least 1 number and no spaces. Well, with the new site, it actually has to be at least 12 characters. They have to include, for security purposes, uppercase letter, lowercase letter, special character, and at least 1 number. And another change is that the students must also verify their email before they continue filling out the application. So as soon as they do the account setup, make sure they go and verify their email, then they'll have immediate access to the application. So this is the old site. If students access the old site, they'll see this message. And so they'll know if they're applying for fall or spring, fall 21 or spring 22, they should still continue to use the old site, but any student applying for summer 2022 or beyond, they will use the new site. One big feature from the old site was the copy feature. The copy feature has actually been removed, and the biographical information in the profile now automatically updates across all open applications. So it still has that same functionality of copying, but they just don't have to select the button in order to do so. The profile information still requires students to enter similar information to the previous version of the site, but it has been expanded to include some common information that's really used across applications like high school information, their college history, Texas residency information. This just prevents students from having to re-enter this information for each application, which they had to do in the previous site. In the old site also, students were asked to enter their social security number after they began a college application. And so that kind of tripped up students as well. But similar to the old site, the new site will ask students to enter their social security number as part of the profile. And similar to before, if a student does not have a social security number, they should just leave that information blank. One final note is that the profile is about 10 short pages long. Like there's not a lot of questions that they'll ask or answer on each page, but there are 10 pages. And any changes that are made to the profile will update across all applications. So for example, if a student completed their profile, they needed to go back and make some revisions to it, and they had, like, say, 6 applications open. Well, when they make those revisions, that profile information will update for all 6 open applications. And then this piece is just highlighting what we said on the previous slide, that the Texas residency information has moved to the profile. This information is presented to the students really based on their responses to the U.S. citizenship questions that they will see on page 3 of the application. This will help the system determine what kind of applicant the kind of application that the student should be filling out, whether international or domestic. We know in the past, some of our students were filling out an international application by accident. And so the hope is that by pulling this information into the profile, we prevent this from happening. And this information is reactive, and so it'll respond to the students' responses to different questions. Unlike the old site, the questions are all contained on one single page as well. For the application section, the application is now split into 3 primary sections. The core questions that are shared between application types, common questions for like the U.S. freshmen that are also asked for maybe say the U.S. transfer application or even the U.S. graduate application. And then though there are some institutions that you all know that have custom questions set up for specific application types. And so there's an additional section for that. And if applicable, the essay can be accessed from the main application cards. Applications are also now color coded based on the institution's school colors. And so here's an example of what the different application cards might look like in the application list. So as you can see here, the student has incomplete sections for Long Star College and completed sections for Texas A&M. You can also see that A&M has an essay and also a separate scholarship application. So that's really clear of what the requirements are for this particular school. Students can see which application is ready for submit and which is not. And when an application is ready for submit, the students can simply just click that submit button at the bottom. And here's an example of some of the sections that are included in that core questions section. Based on the application type, there's a different number of pages. So not all sections will be required, and it'll really be based on what's required of the institution. But you can see here, there's still the biographical information, senior courses, similar to before, as well as extracurricular and information about employment and volunteering. The search feature is something else we wanted to highlight when it comes to the high school information. So the search tool is no longer presented as a pop-up window. It's now actually in line with the tool. This process has been simplified to really allow students to just search for their high school by entering the name of the city that their high school is located in, or just simply by entering their high school name. A list will start to populate and they can just actually select from that list. You also may be aware that there is a new dual credit application type, excuse me. The dual credit information is no longer located within a single application. So it's a distinct application type available for any school that offers this type of application. You would see an example like you see here on screen, where a student would just select dual credit and start to fill out the questions for that particular application type. Tracking progress is something else we wanted to highlight. So the application has really been improved to just hopefully make it a little bit easier for students to track their progress throughout an application. So the application listings page includes sections that are marked with an exclamation point, as you can see here, or a check mark based on whether or not a student is complete or incomplete with a certain task. And then also the system offers a filter that will allow students to filter by the application status. So if I just want to see the ones that are in progress, I could hit in progress and just see those. And so our hope is that that makes it a little bit easier for students to understand like which applications they really need to focus on and finish up. And this is, here is when a good example at the bottom is like when a student is ready to submit, they'll see this submit this application option. So this will take the student to the submission page where the student will review that normal like certification information, answer any final questions. Sometimes there's institution specific additional questions that the student has to answer. And on that submissions page is where the student would select the application fee method of payment and then actually submit it, and then it'll bring up a little pop-up for the confirmation page, and it kind of like puts confetti on the screen and lets students know that they've successfully completed that application. We also wanted to highlight the counselor suite. So now for this one in particular, I wanted to just share a few updates related to it, similar to the actual application for the students. There's also a new landing page for the counselor suite. And I know probably some of the questions in the chat are around how to access it. So that link is currently not available, but I'm hoping that it'll be available later this month. And as soon as it does become available, we'll make sure that we share that information out and everybody does have access to it. So definitely working to get that up and running and get that link out for everyone. But there will be a new landing page for the counselor suite as well. And then wanted to just share a little bit about what's new. So the counselor suite, similar to the application side of ApplyTexas for students, it's also optimized for mobile. It's actually now on its own site. ESC authorization has had some improvements really to help just make sure that there's a better connection to school districts rather than individual schools. District level counselor results are returned as one list, and previously, you had to kind of switch between high school to access that data, but you can see all the high schools if you're a district level counselor in one list. And finally, ApplyTexas and the FAFSA applications have been merged, so you don't have to toggle between the two applications. You'll actually see all of the statuses together, and we'll share a little preview about what that looks like here in a sec. So this is an example of what the high school counselor would see. So you can quickly see that this student has completed a FAFSA, but not started any ApplyTexas applications in this case. And so the student could have just set up their account, but not actually began to complete their profile. The biggest change is that in the previous site, there were two separate lists for students who completed the ApplyTexas application and those who had completed a FAFSA. Students would now appear on the same list. And so in the new site, everything's been combined. You can quickly see if student has completed one application over the other. And then there are 3 options to download at the bottom of the screen. The first one, you can actually just download the full page. There's an option for you to download the FAFSA and the ApplyTexas information combined, but then you still also have that single option. If I just want to see ApplyTexas data or I just want to see FAFSA data, you'll have an option to download them as single as well. And then this is similar example for the district level counselors. So this is the view that you would see. You can see the students list from different high schools within the district, and similar to the individual counselor view, a district level counselor will have access to both the FAFSA and the ApplyTexas status information for each student on a single list. One additional change for the district level counselor view is that all of the schools are now combined into one list across the district. So if they have the option available, they'll be able to filter for a specific high school and download options. They'll have the same download options as an individual counselor. So download the page or download the data combined for FAFSA and ApplyTexas, or just download a single application data. And if you or your students have questions or need help with the new application, we definitely encourage you all to reach out via these emails. So the first one is for the students. You would have them reach out directly using that email. And then you as counselors or advisors or district counselors, you would actually use the bottom email. And I will now turn it over to Yvette to share what's new with the Common Application.
Perfect. Thank you, Jaslyn. And before you start, Yvette, I just want to let some folks in our audience know we are keeping track of some questions that you all had for ApplyTexas. Just to make sure we get through all of our information this morning, we're going to address those at the end. Okay. All right, Yvette, go right ahead.
Thanks so much. And hi, everybody. Next slide, please. So for today's information regarding the Common App, I'm going to discuss the Common App community, application updates, and advising toward tools and resources. So a little bit about the Common App community, and I actually want to start real quick on one of the questions that was asked earlier in the chat regarding what institutions are members of Common App. So currently, we are almost at 1,000 institutions that use and accept applications from the Common App, and that actually not only includes colleges and universities, and so these are specifically undergraduate degree-seeking institutions, so schools that are 4 years. Currently, we do not have any junior colleges. We do have some institutions that have connections to junior colleges on Common App, but that is something that we are working towards in the future. We also do have some associations that are members of Common App. So if you have applicants that are interested in applying for Jack Kent Cooke, for example, if they qualify, they actually do have their application as part of Common App. But I do want to definitely highlight our mission as an organization. So we are a non-for-profit member organization committed to the pursuit of access, equity, and integrity in the college admissions process. And as we keep going through today's presentation, you'll see how some of the changes to this year's Common App do highlight back to our mission. So I wanted to take some time to showcase what institutions in the state of Texas are members of Common App. So you can see there are currently 21 institutions in your state that do accept the Common Application, and we have highlighted here the 7 public schools. And then just looking at the total number of applications, we've received this year over 1 million applicants. So that's unique individual users who are applying as future students of colleges and universities. And they've submitted this year 6.6 million applications through our system. So there's a lot of outreach and use in our system, which is really exciting to see. And you can see of our list of top states, Texas is right up there. So of all our applications this year, 5% came from your state. And again, digging a little deeper into those numbers this again is data from our most recent application cycle, because the new application for 21-22 did launch on August 1st this year. So this data is based on 2021. We did receive, we had over 500,000 unique applicants, so again, individual students create accounts on our system, and they submitted over 250,000, over 250,000 applications, and they submitted to almost all of our institutions on our platform. So last year we had around 921 schools on Common App, and students from your state submitted to almost 900 of them. And you can see the top institutions here. And it's interesting too to point out that 75% of your students did apply to schools outside of the state of Texas. And then finally, I wanted to show this quick slide talking about a year-over-year comparison. We did see just nationally an increase in applicant accounts and applications submitted. We definitely actually saw more of an increase on the number of applications submitted compared to our growth in applicants. These numbers are specifically about the state of Texas, but this is a trend we saw nationally and internationally as well. So let's deep dive into the application itself. So next slide, please. One of the things I definitely wanted to highlight is our rollover process. We know that this is a feature that a lot of students and counselors are really excited about every year. So again, we launched the next year, the new year's application system on August 1st. However, students don't have to wait until their senior year to create an account on Common App. They can start really as early as they want, as long as they log in each year so that their information gets transferred over. So all they need to do, so if you have students who, let's say you did a workshop last year and had them create accounts as juniors, now they can go in, they can use their same username and password, and they can go back into their account. And yes, I see the question about James Madison joining Common App, and they are. So excited to have them officially go live, I believe, in a couple of weeks. So rollover, really want to highlight what does and does not roll over. So what does roll over? Information on their common section of the Common App. So information about their profile, so i.e. name, address, information about their family, education, etc. What does not roll over are the things on the My Colleges tab, and it's because it's institution specific, and each year institutions change their question sets. So it just becomes really murky to try to transfer that information over because it's not going to be the same. So rather than trying to deal with all of that data translation, it just becomes a clean, fresh slate for students when they're actually ready to complete what they will use to apply to their institutions of choice. So we definitely, as an organization, again, very mission driven, we do not want application fees to prevent students from being able to apply to their institutions of choice. So do apologize for a little bit of the weird reformatting here in this slide, but did want to highlight that there are over 400 institutions that don't require a fee. And it is sometimes confusing. People do ask if those fees are collected by Common App. No, they are asked by the institution, but tons of institutions not only have their own fee waivers, but all members of Common App do have to accept the Common App fee waiver. So students should still apply regardless of their background. We also want to highlight that this year, not only is our platform mobile friendly, so if you just want to log into commonapp.org and actually do your application from your phone, you can on the web browser, but you can also download the Common App, which is on the App Store. It's available. I have it on my phone, and it's the same credentials. It's nothing different, but if you have students who would prefer to complete their application via an app, they can definitely do so. So this is going to be probably a big topic of discussion. I saw some really great questions in the chat earlier asking about DACA students and has questions been reformatted. From a Common App perspective, they have been. So an initiative started last year that is continuing on into this season is evolving the application. We have been taking in feedback from all different constituencies and really wanting to take a stand on making the application itself more equitable and accessible for all students. And so a lot of the places to start is looking at our questions. So this year we did release and make changes to the Common App itself. So we revised questions regarding sex and gender, family. We removed a lot of questions that were causing barriers, particularly for undocumented and DACA students. We removed the military discharge question from the Common App. We reorganized questions on the citizenship section to try to make it easier for students, again, particularly for those who are undocumented in DACA. We removed the religious affiliation question. So while institutions that are religious probably did re-add that question to their questions section, we removed it from the Common App so that isn't a barrier for students. And then a big one is we did remove school discipline. And a few years ago, we also removed criminal history from the common portion as well. Personal essay. So there are 7 different personal essay prompts that a student is able to select from if they're applying to institutions that require and or accept the Common App essay. And it is important to note that we do list directly on the site if an institution a student is added to their application does require and or accept it. And the student actually does have the option when they go to submit their application to decide if they want their personal essay submitted to schools that don't require it. So that is an option in the system. And you can see on this slide a quick breakdown of what is the most popular or historically have been the most popular essay topics for students. It's more about, in my opinion, and have been a reader of essays, what works best for the student, as you all know, but this is an interesting breakdown. I also wanted to highlight that we did add a new prompt this year. So we added a prompt about gratitude, not gratuity, we're not paying bills here, but gratitude. And if this speaks to your students, it's an essay prompt available to them. Also wanted to highlight our COVID-19 question. So we did add in a question last year to the application talking about community disruptions. And the goal of this question is to be evergreen. So while it definitely does highlight and says, COVID-19 directly within the question label itself, we do also want students to feel that they can use this question if they would like to provide additional information about any kind of more bigger, potentially national disaster type of things that impact their life. So, if you unfortunately have students impacted by wildfires or personal trauma or other things, they are welcome to use this question if they would like to provide additional context to colleges. It is 100% optional. So it's definitely not something that students have to complete, but can if they feel that it makes sense with their application. So some additional updates. Yep. So I just clicked through the slide. And there were some extra things, but so for the first year system for testing, we did add Cambridge and Duolingo. We removed pre-2016 SATs since it most likely will not impact students who are now applying. We did for current year courses, we aligned that language and the data points within courses and grades. And so for those who might not be familiar with that section, it is a section within Common App where currently I believe we have about 50 institutions who want self-reported grades as part of the application process. It just sometimes makes it easier for decision making, particularly if they have an earlier deadline for scholarships, for example. They may not get those transcripts in time. So we did try to make it a little easier for students to navigate because it is asking for a lot of information. So definitely if any of your students are applying to the institutions that require courses and grades, hopefully it'll be a little bit more streamlined. For the transfer application, if you have students that use our transfer system to apply to institutions, we also made some changes there. So we updated the military section and the common documents area. So what we mean by show hide is that it only shows if it's appropriate, and it doesn't show that question if, based on other questions a student answered previously, it doesn't make sense. So we try to make that a little bit more dynamic so that logic helps prevent further confusion. We did update document types as well. So it did make it a little easier for students to be able to know where they need to send what additional documentation and in what means. We also updated several inline text options throughout the transfer application. So what I mean by inline text is just additional instructional text or, FAQs, so frequently asked questions. So hopefully, again, we can provide more resources as students are navigating the application. And then we did equivalent evolving the application changes that we highlighted earlier in this presentation on the first year application in the transfer application as well, to try to make sure that both systems are aligned. Because while they're hitting different populations, we know that we still want to be accessible all the way through. And then something I actually loved, to bring the joy, we did add confetti to the submission email for transfer. It was a big hit last year for confetti to be added to the first year application. So wanted to make sure we could bring in the joy for the transfer applicants as well. So recommender updates. So I know this will probably impact a lot of you. So for the counselor system, we improved the ability to identify reason and content for updates on the optional report. So we know that the optional report is optional, but in some cases it makes a lot of sense. We wanted to make it a little bit more transparent of when this report should be or could be used by your counseling community. So we also had the ability to submit an additional optional report. We know that student circumstances can change at the drop of a hat. So we wanted to make it, again, more flexible, especially if a circumstance potentially changed again midway through. We removed the school disciplinary question from the school report. So not only did we remove it from the Common App, but we removed it from the school report as well to, again, really advocate for students. If anyone has questions, we actually did a lot of research on this question, and we're able to get a lot of information about who this question was disenfranchising and the value of it. So I'm excited for that change, and we think will make a big difference. We also did add Cambridge courses to the school profile. And that's it. So next slide, thank you. We did also expand our integration partners. So you can see listed on our slide are all the different CRM or platforms that you might use at your school to review and collect your transcripts and your student information. And so we added 4 new partners this year. So if you do have any questions, let me know, and also feel free to contact our support team. All right, let's jump into advising tools and resources. So the first thing I highly recommend that you do, and you can also encourage your students' families to do, is create a practice account. A question I get all the time is the practice account the same as the student experience? Am I going to be getting a watered down version? No, it is exactly the same, but the only difference is you won't have the ability to actually click submit, which at the end of the day is a good thing, because, unless you really want to be evaluated as Harry Potter, I don't know if you need to click that submit button. So that way you will experience the same exact environment. So I would encourage you guys to create an account as an educational professional, and you're more than welcome to share this information with your students' parents, and they can create accounts as well. I also recommend, and I linked it in the chat as well, exploring our commonapp.org site. We have a ton of resources here. So next slide, please. The first resource I want to highlight, thank you. Next slide, please.
Sorry, just 1 second. I think we lost our.
And I'm going to just scan the chat real quick, because it's hard for me to do that as I'm talking. Is there any way to make the requirements grid downloadable as an Excel? Oh, great question. So let me think about, I know for a fact, the PDF version, I believe you can search. I'm happy to, share my contact information, or you can contact our support team. I believe the PDF version is searchable once you've kind of accessed it, but I don't believe at this moment we have an Excel version of that. But that's a great point of feedback. I will say, if you do have any feedback for Common App, check out our ideas portal so you can submit feedback at any time. I believe I'll see after I stop talking, I'll find the address and I'll put it in the chat, but that would be a great idea as an enhancement request. Someone also asked, are there higher rates of applications for those institutions institutions with fee waivers? That's a really interesting question. So I think it kind of depends. It's hard to quantify what higher really means, because I think from a school perspective, they even want to know what's the matriculation rate. And having had conversations with institutions, a lot of cases, the matriculation rates for students with fee waivers versus those who don't are equal. So it's more about giving students that opportunity to apply. And again, in some instances, schools have decided that a fee is not even necessary for their application process. So great question. I'm going to keep going back into the presentation because I know we're starting to run short on time. So wanted to highlight from our commonapp.org page. You can go to the Explore Colleges section. So it's just, at the top, it says find a college. And this is the place that you go to. And this is where I would say you can start that journey with your students about thinking where they want to apply, and they can see if that institution or institutions are on Common App. And not only can they just type in a name and find a school, but they can also use on the left-hand side our filter features to find institutions that match the qualities they as a student are looking for. So there are a lot of options there, and you can see on the left what some of those are. As a student then actually goes into each institutional profile on the Explore Colleges page, they'll see additional details, links to other resources. One of the my favorite things I love to point out here is you'll see on the screenshot there are a ton of green tabs. And we call them tags, and they are what students can also search by when they're in the larger search section, but it highlights different qualities the school wants students to know about them. So that they offer an ROTC program, or they're based in a certain region. So that way it makes it easier for students to find other like institutions. Thank you. And so, within this page too, students can look at academic programs, see what each school offers, and if it's that right fit for them. We also have a ton of resources on our site about planning for college. So this way students can begin to explore, and these different resources are tailored based on where the student is on their educational journey. We have resources for middle school students all the way up through those juniors and seniors. We also have resources for you. So we have downloadable PDFs about getting started on Common App. What is Common App? How does it work? One of my favorites here is the actual Common App dictionary. So one more click for me, I think it will pop up. Yep. So there's a lot of jargon in higher education, as you all have noticed that your careers. And so we really try within the app dictionary to note what those words mean to help students, parents, and counselors navigate that process. So hopefully these resources can be helpful as you're planning your own educational seminars and workshops throughout this application season. So the first year recommender system, we did a redesign last year. So this will be kind of that second year of the new color scheming and branding. And so far we've gotten really positive feedback. So again, we do have a downloadable version requirements grid, but I love the idea of making it Excel. So again, submit that idea. I think it's a good one. You can also track students' progress, export their details, the student details as an Excel, et cetera. So hopefully this makes it easier for you to navigate our system moving forward if you do use the Common App recommender system to submit recommendations. We do also offer 24/7 support. So this is both for you as well as your students. Also something to highlight, as a member of the counselor community, you are able to schedule a call with our support team. So if your questions aren't getting answered, you need additional help, you as a recommender can schedule a call with our team, and we're happy to kind of workshop your problem with you. And then also wanted to take a quick moment to highlight our Reach Hire initiatives. So for those who might not know, Reach Hire was Mrs. Obama's higher ed initiative that she started when her husband was in the White House, and it has continued on as its own social change organization, and they became part of the Common App family back in 2019. So here are just some of the amazing resources that Reach Hire is promoting. So definitely get your students excited about College Signing Day in May and all the other ways that they connect with the larger community internationally and domestically. And to learn more, definitely encourage you to sign up for our monthly newsletter. We send a ton of information every month to counselors and teachers on that listserv. Again, encourage you to create a practice account. I didn't really get to dive too much into it, but there is an advisor role within the Common App. So if you have a student who you know is involved in a community-based organization, or a really anxious parent who wants to see what's happening in their student's account, students can invite those individuals to be an advisor. And I believe they can invite up to 3 people to be an advisor and look at their application without having to actually give them their password. And then students can also control who doesn't get access. So that way they can still feel in control, but get the support they need. Finally, take advantage of our free resources and connect with us on social media. And thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Yvette. I'm going to address, there was one question in there someone had asked, and I know there's many, many questions. We're going to kind of go back to some of them and see how many we can answer, but we are keeping track of the questions for those that we don't answer. I did see someone, Yvette, asked about using the practice portal or the practice common application in a classroom setting. Do you see that there would be any issue with that, Yvette, since it's about the Common App?
Yeah, great question. Not at all. So the way that it works is if you go to apply.commonapp.org and you click on the button that says create an account, it's going to pop up with that window that was in that screenshot that shows, are you a first year, a transfer, an educational professional, or a parent. So how you would actually create a practice account is you select either educational, professional, or parent. Both are going to get you into that practice account track. And then you'll see at the top of your screen, there will be under your name and account ID will be in letters practice account, so that it is very apparent that this will not allow you to submit. So it's totally fine to use that. I use practice accounts all the time when I'm demoing the application system. So I think it's totally warranted to use as you're workshopping with students.
Perfect. And then most recent question, I don't know that everyone was able to see it, but there is not a district counselor portal like we described in ApplyTexas in the Common App. Is that correct, Yvette?
I believe so. So I apologize. I'm not 100% familiar with what a district portal is. Can you give me a quick summary?
So I'm gonna kind of speak for you, Jose, but like one of the things that we see in ApplyTexas is like where you can see all of your students. It looks like they've made a feature in ApplyTexas, so you can actually see all schools that are in a district. So that would be like, I think the screenshot we used was Austin ISD here in Austin. So that would be like going into the Common App and having someone at the district level see what would be going on the Common App and that activity for the whole district.
Got it. Yep. So as of now, it is at just the individual counselor level. So while counselors can see all the students they directly support, it would not be at either, a higher level than that individual counselor.
Perfect. Thank you. So we have 5 minutes left. I'm going to go back to a couple of the ApplyTexas questions. Yes.
I'm happy to jump in. I know there were quite a bit. So one of the questions was about when a student starts a new application, will that information autofill? Like we said in the beginning, the student's when they complete the profile, that information will autofill, but also the core questions will transfer over because those are common questions used amongst multiple applications. So that includes like their senior year coursework, their testing for SAT, ACT, household information, extracurricular, community community service volunteer information as well. So they will not have to re-enter that information and will copy over. Can students submit the application like E&M before the essay as before? So no, that option at the bottom that we said where we saw that ready to submit. So it would actually say not ready to submit and student, it would be grayed out. So if I clicked on it, it wouldn't take me anywhere because A&M does require an essay. Now, if the college has an optional essay, then it would allow the student to submit the application. There was another question about, are the 4-year and 2-year applications still separate? So they are 2 distinct application types. So there's still an option to select 2-year and select 4-year, but that information about like the profile and some of the common information will still pull into those applications. So they'll still have some information that is copied over. So there was another question that said students, will they have to go, like if they submit and then go back to actually like complete the essay? So students will actually be able to view and edit their essay once they submitted it. They can actually submit the essay up to 2 times. So this will allow them to be able to view the list of like whatever the essays are available and make sure that they get that submitted up to 2 times. We definitely encourage students to put that in a separate document so they would save it because we know sometimes like the technology gets really, really crazy. There was another question regarding the number of entries for extracurricular activities. Unfortunately, it's still the same. There's still only 10 entries for entering extracurricular information. And the way the system is set up, it's actually a button that a student needs to click at the bottom. So they would only see 1 entry. And then when they click, I need to add another extracurricular activity, that's when they get another option. So be sure to tell your students that in case they're looking for another option. There was another question about what FAFSA information does a counselor see? So they will see this, the completed status. They'll also see the completed date, the date it was processed, and whether or not the student was selected for verification. I'm also going to put an FAQ for ApplyTexas and FAFSA in the chat now. And then the last thing was, should the counselors continue to log into the old suite until the new suite is available? I'm hearing now from our points of contact that it'll likely be mid-August that the new suite will be released, but the old suite is still available currently. So hopefully I got to the bulk of the questions, and I'm putting that FAQ in the chat now.
That was like record time going through questions, Jaslyn. And thank you, Yvette, for addressing all of the ones on the Common app. Let's see. So at this point, we will share. Don't forget that we are going to share the recording with you. And our team also keeps track of the questions that we have. Thank you, Jaslyn. I see the FAQ document. Hopefully you all can see that in the chat. So we'll follow up with a recording. I hope we answered all of these questions for you. I know it's a really important thing to get all of these fantastic updates. And so thank you all so much for joining us this morning. We had several hundred people register, so we'll share the recording and stay tuned and check the monthly webinar series on our website. We have planned everything throughout the whole year through June. So thank you all so much again for joining. We will be in touch and share the recording with you. Take care and have a great week. And I hope the beginning of the school year goes well for you. Thank you.